The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, everybody, this is Krishna here. Just want to thank you all for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in different parts of the world. We have another very exciting webinar today from Dr. Fuad Hamidi from the University of Maryland. The title is Community Engaged Innovation, Co-Designing Emerging Technologies with Diverse Stakeholders. It's very appropriate and timely topic, considering that all the things that are happening in the communities around the world, how to develop technologies for for the various situations that are changing. So, and on behalf of IFEES, GDC, and IUCE, I welcome you all from different parts of the world, and thank you for joining us. Fuad is the details about his background are in the announcement that was sent to you. So I'm sure you have had a chance to take a look at that. So without much ado, I'm going to get you to see the screen and have Fuad make his presentation. So just a second here. Fuad, just click show my screen. Yep, you're all set. Full screen mode. Yep, please go ahead.
Okay. Is it
yeah, it's
in
fine.
the correct mode?
Perfect. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for the warm introduction. It's a pleasure to present today to this webinar about some of my research projects and the overview of the work that I've been kind of doing in the past few years for the International Federation of Engineering Education Societies. Thank you very much for the invitation. So the title of the presentation is Community Engaged Innovation, Co-Designing Emerging Technologies with Diverse Stakeholders. And essentially, this is an overview of a number of the projects that I've been doing in the past few years. And also with some emphasis on how the relationships that were necessary for the projects were developed over the years. One moment. Okay, perfect. I'm an assistant professor in information system at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, or UMBC. And I'm also the director of the Designing Participatory Futures, or DARE lab, which is part of the Human-Centered Computing program there. We do have a physical lab, as you see from the pictures. I have students working on different projects. And if we were not in a pandemic, I would invite whoever's visits Baltimore and would like to come visit the lab to come and visit us. And once this situation passes, of course, we'd be happy to show you around and with the equipment and meeting some of the students. A lot of the work, as you see from the photos, are kind of field work going into the communities, working with diverse participants, collecting data, a mix of qualitative and quantitative research methods, although mostly kind of recently focused on the qualitative side of things. A lot of my research is community-based, and I often work with organizations external to the university, and these include community labs, makerspaces, disability advocacy groups, and nonprofits. The overarching research team in my lab is participatory design and evaluation of emerging technologies to support the empowerment and inclusion of diverse users. So that's a lot of different concepts there. Just to kind of clarify a little bit, by emerging technologies, I mean technologies that are not yet prevalent, but are becoming more and more common. And the idea is that I believe it's important to investigate how these technologies may benefit big parts of society, and people are not left out basically from using them. Also, the other side of the coin is to ensure that these technologies do not cause unintended harm. So there is a number of projects that I've been working on, and I'll share my website at the end of the talk. So of course, because of time, I won't be able to go into all of them. I'll only focus on the top 3 projects that I have in this image. But I wanted to mention also some of the other projects that I'm working on. So just kind of describing quickly, I also am interested in inclusive privacy So kind of privacy methods that are focused on people who are not non-experts, essentially. Living media interfaces, so systems that combine living organisms and digital systems. And intercultural collaboration, which I believe there's opportunities within this community because there's a lot of kind of different backgrounds coming together. I'm interested to see how culture impacts innovation, essentially. Today, as I mentioned, I'm going to focus only on the top three images that have, and projects that I've included here. So these include do-it-yourself assistive technology, youth technology-rich job training programs, and also a very recent project on community internet. So let's go ahead and get started with the first one. So you might have heard of the do-it-yourself maker movement that has emerged in the last few decades. It's a kind of a popular movement or popular kind of approach to technology development and innovation. It's very grassroots. But essentially, just to kind of define it, making is as an umbrella term that refers to a wide range of activities, including tinkering, customizing, designing, and fabricating small batch artifacts that usually require technical skills in self-directed projects. These projects are usually done by amateurs, so people who are not professionally kind of working in these spaces. And in the last few years, or in the last few decades rather, the possibilities of these approaches to support learning, especially STEM and STEAM learning, so science, technology, engineering and math, and arts, and also community engagement have been recognized. So research has shown that some populations were not traditionally represented in, let's say, engineering or science communities, and the workforce might be, these approaches can provide pathways for them to be included in that space. So there are a few kind of components that are usually focused on in this space. One of them is the emergence of low cost and technically accessible fabrication methods and prototypes. So these include open source hardware. So for example, the Raspberry Pi microcomputer or the Arduino are some of the products that are really used widely in this community. And also rapid prototyping and fabrication methods such as 3D printing, 3D scanning, laser cutting, and other forms of fabrication. So in addition to that factor, another aspect of this approach is, as I mentioned, hands-on self-directed projects and a very vibrant kind of online community of online and offline. So there's also offline events, but also a very active online community that kind of support each other in these types of projects. So in this project, that I'm very interested in many different aspects of making and DIY, but the project that I want to discuss right now is looks at how can these do-it-yourself and maker approaches support the creation of assistive technologies. So assistive technologies are technologies that are designed for people with disabilities. Of course, there's many different types of assistive technologies. They can be prosthetics, they can be mobility technologies, or communication technologies. So in this particular project, I was interested in augmentative and alternative communication technology. So a lot of the previous work in this space has looked at, for example, 3D printed prosthetics, as you might have heard of these projects. And that's really interesting. There's a lot of excellent work there. But this idea of creating alternative communication technologies is a little bit underexplored. So that was kind of one of the reasons that I wanted to look into it. So some examples of AAC are boards that can be, they have a number of buttons. I have some pictures on the screen, and essentially for somebody who has difficulty with their speech or communication, they can have either a software or a hardware platform, and they can touch or select an element on these devices, and it would essentially play back an audio representation of a speech or words that they might be wanting to communicate. So obviously, there's a lot of this technology out there. Commercially, they're produced. Some of them work very well. There are very well-known examples that are available. However, the needs of people with disabilities are very diverse. Many people can use these existing technologies, and many can't. And one of the attractions of this, the DIY and the maker approach, is to understand how can we fill some of those gaps. So in this project, I co-designed a low-cost AAC with a special education teacher. Here's a picture of him at the Maker Fair a few years ago in Toronto, and he was basically building a device that was designed based on the needs of his students. So some of them had difficulty pressing buttons or having very complex overlays, similar to the commercial versions that I showed before. And so he was creating this simplified version that would be very, very specific to the needs of some of his students. So we worked together for some time and with some other colleagues, and we came up with a version of this device that you'll see in this picture. We call it TalkBox. It's a DIY communication board for nonverbal users. And essentially, in this picture, it shows a little girl who has a cerebral palsy and is nonverbal, so she doesn't have, she can't use her speech, and she can put this device on her basically wheelchair tray and use it to make symbolic communication. So very limited communication, but hopefully that would lead to more complex and kind of developed communication. So this was an initial step. We developed a prototype. We tried it with a few participants, this girl being one of them. There were also a couple of other people who were not in wheelchairs, but they were, for example, they had autism, so their speech was limited, but they could still communicate using this, and they could hold it in their hand. And then once we established that, okay, this is something that is useful and actually can meet the needs of some of the individuals, we decided to deconstruct it, because part of what we were interested in was not to create just a technology, but something that could be used to engage members of the community. So the parents, the teachers, the therapists, and the children themselves in building their own technologies and customizing them. Because a lot of times in the assistive technology space, and also generally more broadly in technology space, a lot of technologies are built and then handed down to users. But there is a place for supporting the agency of users, especially in customizing and making sure that technologies best fit their needs. So that was kind of the approach that we wanted to take in this project. So the picture here shows on the left kind of a built TalkBox, and I want to mention that also just to make sure it's clear, the way that the system works is that it has a number of pads that are basically conductive. They're connected to a Raspberry Pi and a speaker, and when somebody touches those pads, whatever audio is associated with those pads will be played back, and essentially that's the basic mechanism there. So there are capacitive touch sensors that are connected to the pads. The number of the pads and their shape and their size can be, and their sensitivity actually can be tweaked based on the needs of the users. So once we had this kit of different pieces and some instructions, we ran a series of collaborative workshops where children or adults who were nonverbal and some of their family would come together with some of our student volunteers, and they would essentially build their own devices. And we were looking to see what is the impact of this building on them. Would they continue using the device longer? Would it lead to increased use and so on? So in the initial workshops that we ran, all the groups were able to complete their TalkBox devices and actually bring them home and use them for some time. So again, this kind of gave us a lot of hope for some possibilities that can arise. But also we got a lot of feedback around other uses of this device. And this is kind of the important part about bringing technology and prototypes early on to the community and getting feedback, because especially when it comes to populations who are very different, their needs or desires might be very different from those of designers and researchers, it's hard to know what are those specific needs. So one of the things that we got back from these workshops was that these devices were very well suited to music making and audio creation. So since then, we've been working on better versions, improved versions of Hotpot. So you'll see in the picture on the left, there is a version of it that's kind of like a small modified, almost like a piano or keyboard. And actually, we've been using this with some music therapists and music teachers at special education programs that utilize audio and music to engage children. Another idea that came out of those workshops and from the feedback that we received from parents and therapists was that there is a possibility, if there is a possibility to disconnect this input mode. So, for example, in the talk box, you press a button and audio is played back. Maybe that pressing of the button could be something that doesn't need to be connected to the audio source. So we came up with another version of the system called SenseBox, where it actually uses RFID tags. And the idea is that you can embed the tag. So the picture on the right actually shows, you see a green box. It kind of includes all the electronics in there. It has an audio player and so on. And then we have a number of tags. And those tags can be attached, they can be associated with audio files. It can be a song, it can be a speech, but generally in the uses that we had so far, it's been basically an accessible music player. So if a child, let's say, likes to play music, but they have difficulty using an iPad or using YouTube, they can embed these songs, or their therapist can embed these songs into the module. And then once they bring close the RFID tag to the module, it would essentially play back the audio. So I won't go into a lot of detail about these developments because of time, but I put the names of the papers that, or the venues of the papers that talk about these technologies a little bit more in detail. Specifically, the new system with the RFID tag is called SenseBox, and we presented it at the TI conference last year. So one of the outcomes, another kind of outcome that was interesting in relation to these devices is that the cost of the devices is actually pretty low, and they can be, the material that's used in them, they can be used based on the context of use. So we got some interest in different communities in this type of device, and they wanted to essentially start building their own devices. And one of my colleagues whose work is in Kenya actually wanted to adopt some of these technologies in Western Kenya, so in Kisumu, which I believe is the third largest city in Kenya. He's the head of a community-based organization there, working for a long time with communities, with special education teachers, and with individuals with disabilities, both with non-governmental and governmental organizations. So we conducted a series of workshops there with community members to explore, like, how would this technology be used there, and how can it be, how we can build capacity so that it could be something that is of benefit there. So on the picture on the left, you'll see a number of children at the special education school. They are playing with a version of the system that's kind of smaller and more mobile, and there's a teacher that's kind of guiding how it would be used. And then on the right, we have a picture of a number of individuals at the technology hub, actually a local technology hub, looking to see how the technology is kind of put together and can be assembled. So the idea there is that with these types of technologies, how can we facilitate technology appropriation in the community, meaning that technology uptake, and also how can capacity be built so that these technologies may be used there. Some of the initial findings that we have there, and as I mentioned, I have the venue names on the slide. So if you'd like to have a look at the papers, please have a look at my website. We have the papers there with a lot of details about the outcomes of these workshops. But essentially, we found several ways that both the hardware and the software of the technology was adapted to better fit the practices within the Kenyan context. So there's a picture here with a talk box made out of wood. So this is more durable, and also the material is more useful and abundant. There was a carpenter that worked actually with the technology hub that we were working with to kind of build this version. And also another important piece was that the software was changed so that there could be accommodating for more options because the device was used in a shared way. So so it wasn't each individual using the device. It was actually used in each classroom, and all the children would use it, and it was mostly used for engagement. So this is in collaboration with Pamoja, which is the community-based organization that I mentioned in Kenya, and also York University in Toronto. Okay, so changing gears a little bit, staying on the theme of making and then DIY, but going into another kind of subtopic that's about youth tech job training. So I'm based in Baltimore City, and as I mentioned, a lot of my work is with community partners. And one of the community partners that I've worked with since essentially the day I moved to Baltimore is the Digital Harbor Foundation. And this is a nationally recognized nonprofit organization that serves large numbers like 1,200 to 1,400 youth annually. And it provides informal learning opportunities for youth that are very technology-rich programs that cover common and important topics in making, so 3D modeling and printing, game programming, introductory physical computing, and web development. And the idea is that they utilize a pay-what-you-can model so that members from the diverse communities in Baltimore can attend these programs. And they offer it in an after-school format. So they have summer camps, but most of their programs are offered during the year in an after-school fashion so that the youth can come and kind of supplement their formal educations with the programs they have there. So there's many things that are very special about Digital Harbor Foundation and their approach. The Digital Harbor Foundation, or DHF, that's the abbreviation. But from my perspective, I mean, first of all, I was interested in kind of seeing how they engage the youth and make sure that they feel welcome and they feel excited about the work that was going on there, but also how to best prepare them for future employment. Of course, one of the issues and one of the big topics of being an adult and kind of growing up is doing jobs that are technical. And so in a project that was funded by NSF and in collaboration with DHF, we set up a youth-staffed 3D print shop there so that we could offer technical employment training opportunities for youth. And this project was started and initiated by my mentor, Dr. Amy Hurst, in 2017. So I joined the project a bit later. So she moved to NYU, and essentially we've been working together with my PhD student, William Easley, on this project. So since 2017, there's been 2 cohorts of youth, of 12 youth who have worked here. They're employed there. They're essentially working on very complex tasks of receiving requests from the community about 3D printing jobs, some of them very complex. And over the years, they've completed 60 jobs and printed over 4,000 objects, ranging from therapeutic and medical, not medical devices, but therapeutic prototypes, let's say, and going into objects that were used as conventions and for engaging community in different ways. So from a research perspective, this is an excellent opportunity to look at what are some of the challenges and what are some of the exciting things that come up when you have essentially a living lab. So you have people, and we basically are taking this approach of, in research it's called the living lab, where you can do observations and take an ethnographical approach where you can look at kind of the natural interactions that happens in the workplace of the future. And one of the things that we found is that a key idea is actually a need for effective coordination and digital communication that arises in this context, because there is this idea that the youth have a lot of experience with digital technologies, and they're all on social media and so on. However, in reality, navigating the workspace dynamics professionally and using some of the emerging technologies like Slack and some of the other workplace chatting tools can be quite difficult. So we've been looking very deeply at what are some of the issues that come up in this space, with view of making sure that training programs can empower the youth so that they can really learn these skills well and navigate future job opportunities better. One of the issues that comes up about using these technologies is privacy. And of course, reflecting on privacy is difficult and overwhelming for non-experts, for anyone really, but especially for non-experts. And participatory tools are needed to elicit the privacy perspectives of diverse end users. So when they're using these type of communication and coordination tools, some of the questions that come up are what type of data they're collecting, who is this data shared with, and under what conditions is this data used. So in order to facilitate these type of conversations, we actually created a participatory activities toolkit. The picture shows a number of printed on paper objects that we use to ask detailed questions from the youth about what type of expectations they have. This toolkit is actually originally developed to be used by older adults to think about assistive technologies that they're using, software assistive technologies, and the type of data that they collect. But we were able to also adapt it and use it for in the context of the youth print shop. In addition to the elements here, I won't go into a lot of detail because of time, but the details are in a paper we presented at the Web for All conference. But in addition to the elements here, we have activities that go with the elements. So, and these activities, there's a couple of examples on the screen now. They essentially are card sorting activities. So asking questions about, okay, if you consider a type of technology, let's say Slack, what type of data do you expect it to collect? Or who do you think that this data is going to be seen by? And the activity consists of taking these cards and actually categorizing them in different physical spaces. And then based on that, that can lead to some feedback and some ideas around what are the expectations and whether they match reality. So far, we've been able to use this tool to get a lot of detailed information from the youth. The picture shows laminated charts and elements that I showed in the toolkit. And essentially, it showed that the study so far has shown that the youth have first of all, they like the toolkit, so they're able to use it effectively. But also, they saw it as a useful tool for reflection. So as a way of thinking about explicitly what type of questions might come up, or how should their behavior match their expectations in the context of who can have access to their data in a work context. So we're kind of looking forward to seeing how this toolkit can be used in the future as well. So far, as you see, it's a physical toolkit. It's printed. So we actually are running a new study where we have a digital version of this, so that we can use it even when, due to COVID or other reasons, due to distance, we can't be in the presence of our participants. So there are a few kind of interesting directions that this project is going into. Okay, so I want to take the last few minutes of the talk to talk about a very, very new project for me. This is a community internet project that actually just received funding from the NSF. The last couple of weeks has been the initiation of the research side of this project. but it's also kind of in line with a lot of the issues that are in the news right now and globally impacting everyone, but also locally in our context in Baltimore City is impacting people. So I'm excited to kind of talk about this, but as I mentioned, it's a more recent project, so there'll be more updates soon. So this project is also a collaboration with the Digital Harbor Foundation and also ProjectBased, which is an entity that is looking at providing free internet to low-income communities in Baltimore, and also with UMBC, with my lab, their lab. So I'm on the research side, and DHF and ProjectBased are on the implementation side, and we're working together to address this issue. So essentially, this project aims to respond to the COVID-19 crisis by providing community internet to low-income neighborhoods in Baltimore City. So there is a high percentage of urban low-income neighborhoods in the U.S. that lack high-speed internet. So this has been a long-term issue. It's not new to COVID. But of course, during the crisis, lack of access leads to increased inequity. So you can imagine all of us are using the internet at the moment, and if there is the lack of this technology, I mean, different sectors of a family, let's say, structure are impacted differently. So for example, for children and youth, it's very important to be able to access some form of online educational material, which would be very difficult if there's no high-speed internet. For the adults, their access will be limited to employment opportunities, and for older adults also, if they're staying in to stay safe, they won't have socialization opportunities. So Skyping with family, even kind of being on social media and so on. So these issues are really amplified. They've been present for a long time, this issue of lack of connectivity, but of course the COVID-19 is amplifying it. So I have a image of Baltimore City here. It actually kind of shows the different neighborhoods, and the kind of the darker red colors respond to or relate to neighborhoods that have less internet connectivity. So the percentage of households without connectivity is very high there. And if you're familiar with Baltimore, actually these red areas correspond almost exactly to the areas where there's more low-income neighborhoods and also larger populations of African Americans and Latino populations living there. So you can see that there is a correlation with other factors that is at play here, and this is really an issue in many urban contexts, but especially in Baltimore. So in this project, what we're looking at is how can we find an effective and an efficient way to provide free high-speed internet access to these communities, both during crisis and also beyond that. I mean, even before this project started, ProjectBased were really kind of working and partnering with different organizations to bring internet to the communities. But at this time, as I say, things have become even more urgent. And the idea is that basically ProjectBased is setting up these last mile points of presence, which are essentially working with community partners. So this could be recreation centers, it could be schools or libraries, and amplifying the signals that they have to reach surrounding communities. So creating a mesh network for the communities to connect. And then this is kind of matched with going into the household, setting up routers, having either self-installation or having volunteers go and help the household set up their networks there. And of course, because technology is not the only solution, internet access is not the final say here, Digital Harbor Foundation is actually creating these accessible and localized resources around online learning, employment, and socialization for these communities, so that they can quickly kind of get up to speed with using these resources once the internet access is created. I'm happy to talk about this project more, but I just wanted to kind of give a brief overview about it, and we'll see how it goes in the next few months in terms of implementation. Okay, so just a quick wrap up. So I'm hoping that I've kind of demonstrated some ways that I've been active in the last few years in setting up collaborations and working with community partners and also members of the community. Some key kind of takeaways for me has been the importance of meaningful collaborations. So collaborations that really kind of put address issues that are important and relevant to the communities. So of course, as a researcher, I have to be aware that the work that I do is kind of part of a larger conversation, but in the academic or the research space. But it's very, very important to ground that conversation in the needs and desires of communities that I work with. So from the very onset, people should be at the table and have those conversations. Another idea is that participation and inclusion are key values in my work. So kind of making sure that stakeholders, both direct stakeholders and indirect stakeholders, are taken into account. Of course, this is an aspiration. So, and I'm learning every day, like how to be a better listener and kind of take a back seat and let this possibilities flow. But in my practice, I've really learned that this is really helpful and kind of grounding as well. Finally, sustainability is a big issue. This is a hard one. I think a lot of people are dealing with it. How to make sure that projects are not kind of one-time things, or they just come and go and are very, they don't meet the long-term needs of the communities. I think there are a few approaches. Working with organizations that have long-term stake in the problem at hand is important. But also, but what I mean by sustainability by design is to think about sustainability from the very onset. So when the project is actually getting started, kind of think about, okay, what would happen once the current short-term project goals are reached? How can this kind of go forward? And so on. So those questions should be at the table. And a lot of times community partners have really good ideas about how to approach them. I'd like to thank my students and colleagues. Without them, none of this work would be possible. We have a very active and vibrant community at the UMBC, and I get inspired by my students every day. So I'm very grateful to them, and I wanted to thank them for their work. And that marks the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks for our sponsors, NSF, SSHRC, and Nightler. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, what a fascinating, fantastic presentation for that. I wish we can replicate what you did in multiple places, and all the problems of the world will be solved. This is just amazing. Let me make a couple of comments, and then we'll have some of our panelists make comments. I was particularly impressed with the fact that you engage the community in your community projects, because a lot of times people who do engineering projects for communities, the community partner is just a client rather than participating in the actual design of the activity. I think that was fascinating, and then the fact that you had your youth project, skills project, also go into the entrepreneurship area where the students actually are trying to make a small business out of it, so that there's income generation as well as learning the employability skills, entrepreneurship, fantastic. And then the last project particularly is particularly relevant for many people all over the world, particularly in India, because with all this online activity going on, most of the students do not have access to internet, and so the inequity that you're talking about in Baltimore is really globally, that's a big problem in terms of access to internet. So I hope your NSF project will come up with some really fascinating solutions to all of that issue. So I'm going to have Serene. He's here. Serene Tekinai, from GEDC. Would you like to get the panel discussion going here, Serene?
Thank you so much, Krishna. I enjoyed that talk so very much. Thank you. When you say community engaged innovation, most of the time we talk about the technopark next door or our industrial partners, and not the exact town versus gown. I'd be curious to see the impact of this engagement on the attractiveness of engineering education, especially for girls in that youth in the community. I don't know how long this project has been going on, enough to measure the impact as such. I'm pretty sure it will have a very positive correlation. Could you maybe comment on that?
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind comments. I appreciate it. Yeah, so in terms of inclusion and basically creating diversity in engineering education space, in the project that I mentioned with the 3D print shop, DHF is actively looking to see how to create more role models. So basically, the people they hire, the people who work, who were hired also as managers, the people who were the youth who were hired to work at the print shop. All of these decisions are kind of done with a view of making sure that there's a balanced representation and the atmosphere is welcoming, so that at least always half of the participants or half of the youth who were employed were girls and women. And the idea is that, I mean, there's also theory that supports this, obviously, that the role modeling is something that really impacts self-efficacy. And part of it is that we want these youth to see each other as workers of the future, who can do technical work, who can do complex engineering tasks. And actually, we set up this space in a way that was visible to other youth who were coming to take classes at the center, so that they could see their peers working in these roles, and with the possibility that maybe they finish a couple of programs around how to use a 3D printer, how to fix a 3D printer, they could take a role in this opportunity. So definitely those are things that need to be done consciously, because otherwise one population might become dominant. And I mean, there's the difficulty where, I mean, especially in engineering education and also other STEM fields where there's a problem with representation. So, I mean, role modeling is a big part of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to Roger Hadcraft from Australia. You want to unmute yourself, Roger, and your comments, questions? Yeah, come in.
Thanks, Krishna. And thanks, Farad. That was a fantastic seminar and really, really interesting. One of the things that we've been grappling with, I'm at the University of Technology in Sydney, that we're increasingly engaging with our Indigenous communities. And I'm wondering if you've had any experience of that kind, that you might have some good tips to share in terms of you know, taking groups of students in to work with Indigenous communities around some of these kinds of projects.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So one of the other areas that I didn't talk about a lot was intercultural collaboration and how to work with communities that are kind of have very rich traditions and approaches, and even epistemologies that are looking at technology and innovation in a very different way. And I think the key idea there is to kind of make sure that those conversations happen at the very beginning. I mean, it can be a little bit difficult because in the history of innovation, a lot of times indigenous communities and also racialized communities have not been seen as equal partners, or have been sitting have the same place to sit at the table. And I think we have really valuable opportunities to address this and kind of change that paradigm, so that people can come and bring their knowledge and bring their ideas to the table from the very beginning. So that's part of the participatory approach, and it's wonderful to kind of connect the students to the communities, and to make sure that it's done in a way that that participation as a value is really important. So in my work, I've worked in a couple of communities outside of the United States, with some work in Mexico and in Bhutan that I didn't get to talk about it here. But essentially, a key thing there was to work with representatives from the community who would bring us and invite us into the communities and kind of connect us and act as points of connection, so that we could make sure that our approach is sensitive to the cultural basically aspects of that collaboration. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we got a couple of questions are very relevant to the university environment. Okay, you're doing all these projects, and This is a question from Alicia Marcus, as well as similar question from Chinna Sanjeevaya from India. Are these projects part of the university curriculum, and how do you make it part of the university curriculum? That's because if you make it part of the university curriculum, then they become more sustainable, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Actually, there is a sense of connecting these projects to, there's different ways of kind of connecting them to the curriculum so that they can be more sustainable. The projects that I mentioned, most of them are kind of at the research stage where I've had, I mean, PhD students, master's students, and undergraduates working on the projects so that it has impacted some of their learning. The issue is that, of course, once they graduate and they leave, if they worked on this one independent study or a thesis or dissertation, then that project will have some sustainability issues. Currently, I'm in the process of designing a course that kind of brings some of these learnings into the curriculum, and if that part can be implemented and it can basically be taught over a number of years, I think it's possible to kind of create a repository of some of the ideas related to this project, my projects, and also other projects that I think are similar and are, I mean, there's a lot of amazing work that's being done around the world, but kind of bringing them into some sort of community engaged engineering and innovation course. I think it would be really nice to have that as a way of addressing sustainability from an academic perspective. Yeah, thanks for that comment.
Sure. Thank you. The question from Aaron Shidzumba from South Africa, I believe, because there's a question related to the access of internet to some South African villages. And I think your third project you mentioned has got everybody excited about this possibility. So how do we pay for it, and what exactly is your research involved? I know it's in the beginning stages, but since it's an SF project, you probably have put a lot of thought into how you're going to be going about doing it. And if that's something that can be really scaled up all over the world, that would be a fantastic solution. What exactly do you have? What is the plan for that community internet access?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, so the idea there is that it's a very grassroots approach to internet access. So specifically in the United States, there are two areas that have internet connectivity issues. One is urban settings, and then one is rural settings. So in the rural setting, a lot of the issues come from lack of infrastructure. In the urban settings, the issue is that people have difficulty paying for these subscriptions. And our approach is kind of taking a view that the community organization, so let's say the library, the recreation center, the museum, a lot of them have this broadband internet access as part of their infrastructure. And for them, it's not expensive to pay for this main resource. And then our approach is to partner with them and set up antennas that take that signal and amplify them into the surrounding area so that it can quickly connect urban areas to this connectivity. I would imagine, and my hope is that, I mean, in the research, what I'm doing is I'm documenting this process, so understanding, okay, what are the factors that can lead to its success, and what are some issues that might come up, and also looking at the impact of it on people. So if they haven't had internet before the access, how can we make sure that this access provides meaningful resources for them? So the first part of it is actually something that I'm hoping can be translatable to other contexts. So I imagine that maybe in South Africa or in India or in other contexts where people still might need to have this high-speed internet access established, if there's a way that it can be done that doesn't come at a very high cost to the community, maybe there's a pay-what-you-can model or a free model, and these kind of community centers and organizations can take a role in providing that access, that's basically the idea. So I'm happy to talk more also offline. If you'd like to send me an email, I'd be happy to discuss in more detail. But I think also from NSF's perspective, they're interested in understanding how can we leverage this approach and whether this can scale beyond the immediate the grant that we have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the back to the curriculum question, I guess Andreas Plessis from South Africa again probably from University of Mpumalanga talks about service learning. I guess what you're talking about is also it's termed service learning, right, as a mechanism for engaging students in course-based community projects, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that this idea of connecting with the community, kind of going in and learning from them, and also that could also potentially provide job opportunities for after graduation. So this idea of service learning, I really like it. So far, in my case, a small scale, but it can be larger scale. So if that course takes off, essentially, yeah.
Great. Another question from Anil Kumar from India. He says, do students, when you develop these kits and end products and so on, do students also learn how to prepare documentation like user interface, installation, maintenance instructions, etc.? So that's an important part of project-based learning, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, instructions and documentation. I mean, that comes also with the DIY assistive technology project that I mentioned, because a lot of it is about communication and being able to communicate ideas, so that if people are going to take an active role in building and customizing their own technologies, they know where to go. And in our program, I mean, in the information systems and the human-centered computing program, we really focus on this idea of communication with diverse users. So yeah, definitely, that's a big part of it.
Okay, great. I think we're going to go to Hans Hoyer to make a few closing comments to this very exciting webinar that we had today. Hans, let me just make sure you're unmuted sometimes. Okay, there we go. Okay, let's go. Hans, come in.
Thank you very much, Krishna. Fohad, I remember when you and I connected and I visited as I started my own role at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. And when I met you, I found you to be one of the more creative young engineering professors globally that I've had the privilege of knowing in the role that I play in IFEES and GDC. And I'm very happy, as you can see here, the participation of colleagues from many continents. You heard Australia, South Africa, UAE, you heard India, of course, and so forth. And many of the concepts that you described, for example, in terms of intercultural collaboration, what does that mean? Not only for the professors, but for the students. And the kind of creative work that you're engaged in, I'd like to find ways to link you also to some of the global activities we're engaged in, both IFEES and GDC, for example. We're planning at this particular moment our first virtual global conference. We were supposed to have gone to Cape Town in November, and we'll do it virtually, and among others, not only with young professors, with professors, deans, and corporate colleagues, working closely with students. So I want to dialogue with you and link you and the experience that you have in the current US context, knowing, of course, also your own backgrounds in Iran and in Canada and other parts of the world, to find a way for you to work more closely with us. So I'm very appreciative of your contribution here. I'd like to take it to another step and continue this dialogue and your engagement in our global community. Thanks very, very much.
Thanks, Hans, and thanks, Fuad, and thanks for all the participants who have been with us and asked all these very relevant questions. I think this is a dialogue that is just beginning. I think there's a lot of potential for us to scale up all the kinds of concepts that Fuad has brought to the table, and we'll all do it. We can all do it together. Thank you, Fuad, and everybody stay happy, stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Krishna.
Bye.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.